Hello, listeners, and welcome to episode 3 of AINC's Volunteer Spotlight, brought to you, of course, by AINC. I'm your host, Evan Starnes, and today we have a really exciting guest and a pretty new one, actually. And he is the reader of the Colorado Outdoors magazine, and he's been a volunteer. You've been a volunteer since
August 2022.
Yeah. And he's a very professional and his audio quality is super amazing. So I'm super pumped and excited to have him on the show. This is Jon Arnold.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I figured we'd start the show off with some fun questions, to spice up the show, as I say. So what is your favorite hot drink?
Probably like a lot of people, coffee is partially my blood. So that'd be coffee, espresso specifically.
Right on. And do you make your own espresso or do you prefer to go get it from somewhere?
I'd like to say I make it, but really all I do is push a button at home and it comes out espresso.
Right. Well, that's awesome. I have to agree. Coffee, actually, I was just drinking it and it's kind of part of the reason I'm not, falling asleep right now.
It's essential to modern life, I think.
It really is. I kind of tend to prefer, I like espresso. I prefer it, but it's, it's hard to come by sometimes because we only have one of those single-serve machines. So next up, given the choice between the two, would you prefer to go skiing or snowboarding?
Prior to injuring my knee, right at the outset of the pandemic, it was snowboarding, but I did both.
Nice. Do you find snowboarding to be easier or harder than skiing?
I don't know. They're equal. They both have their challenges. I think the snowboarding was just a little bit funner to me as someone who grew up in the 80s and was riding a skateboard all around.
Yeah, I prefer skiing personally, but I've done both as well, and I've kind of enjoyed... I like snowboarding. You just have to have a lot more control, and you have to be a lot more attentive to what your feet are doing and stuff like that.
Definitely choosing the mountain makes a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so those were definitely the fun questions.
Moving on to the unfun questions.
Indeed. So I'd like to know, first of all, how did you get started with the Audio Information Network? How did you hear about us? And, what made you decide you wanted to volunteer for AINC?
Well, like many people, I sat on my butt for most of the pandemic and really was not that productive outside of my own employment. But I previously, in my previous employment for the University of Colorado, produced a podcast with the Vice President for Communication and then later other hosts called CU on the Air. So I was very interested in audio, also having a background in music. I was doing a lot of digital music during the pandemic and, sometime in the summer last year, towards the end of the summer, I'm like, I would really like to find some type of volunteer opportunity. And I didn't really start out knowing even anything about it. It was really just general Google searches about volunteer opportunities in Boulder. I live in Boulder here, so was really looking maybe for something for the unhoused or something along those lines. But I saw this and someone who loves to read, and I certainly spent a lot of time reading to a young child. I have a 17-year-old daughter. So I thought that this would, and I love technical things. I love gear, so I'm kind of a gearhead in that way. And so this really lined up very, very nicely. It's not a huge amount of time. I usually take about 3 hours a week to do this, so it's the right amount of time I actually have, and it's something I'm really enjoying. As soon as the deeper I got into it, the more I learned I could really enjoy this, and especially given what I'm reading, I enjoy that quite a bit, talking about conservation, talking about the outdoors, that kind of stuff. It's really near and dear to my own heart. And so I think just getting into that, it certainly helps my read when I'm reading something I enjoy. But yeah, finding the AINC was certainly just a whole new world that opened up for me.
I'm glad to hear that. When you first auditioned for us, how'd you feel? Were you nervous? Or a lot of people have been nervous, so I'd like to know.
Anytime you see the word audition, I immediately get nervous. And then it was amped up a few degrees when I actually read the audition. It looked quite challenging, and on the outset, I think, some of the things were quite technical, and I think it's certainly a good screening tool. I'll say that. because it will separate the people who are motivated to do a job like this and the ones who are just like, oh, I like to read into a telephone or something. So, and also just what was needed for that. I thought that was certainly an effective weeding out tool, I guess. It was a challenge. But yes, it certainly brought the nerves up as I started to do it.
And I would definitely have to agree about the audition, because there are a lot of abbreviations and a lot of, there's an example of where, it says like $13.0275. That's something you normally don't read every day. And for people that haven't read the audition before, if you're not a volunteer, there are 2 articles with a lot of big words. There's the second article, there's a lot of foreign language names like Kiksht and stuff like that. And then there's a word list of about 26 words, and they're pretty unusual. There's words that I had never even known the name of, like exigency or voracious. I'd never used these words before. So it threw me for a loop when I first saw the audition, but
yeah, I was trying not to scare off anybody, but yeah, it could be difficult. I think there was a major part of talking about the tribes of the Pacific Northwest, as well as starting to figure fuel economy for an e-car. How do you compare the two? Those things can get really difficult and formulaic stuff. And you're right, talking exactly about these numbers and how we express them vocally, I think it's really opened my eyes, certainly, and just like what I'm reading and how it's conveyed.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think you scared anybody off at all, but definitely I think the biggest thing that people really got to have in their heads when they read this audition is just to relax and don't overthink it, because a lot of people do, and they'll kind of rush. So I'd like to take the focus back to your program, the Colorado Outdoors. So when you first got assigned that show, was it just like, was it basically like you're just reading the Colorado Outdoors magazine, or was it more of like a free-flowing, like, pick what you want to read as long as it's related to Colorado and the outdoors?
It started that way, yeah, because they had a couple back issues we were ready to read. So this first maybe month or 2, I was just reading copy right out of the magazines, the publication. But it's an every other month publication, so I had to quickly discover their website, and they do write articles on their website. I stick with the Colorado Department of Wildlife because that's really what Colorado Outdoors magazine is covering, and that's who runs the publication. But now we're in the swing of things. I really do end up researching the articles, finding the articles I think are seasonal. I'm really looking for the seasonal things given the topic of outdoors in Colorado, and it covers everything from hunting, fishing, bird watching, and certainly the conservation aspect of it all. But it also has survival things. How to, when is the best time to do things, fish in certain locations. If
I've actually gotten a lot of useful information about where you should fish and why it's a good idea to fish in certain areas versus not, if that makes sense. And just stuff that you normally don't think about when you go outdoors. Most people, when they go outdoors, they just think about going outdoors. They don't think about all of the small details involved and the do's and the don'ts, basically.
You're totally right about that. The people don't. I didn't realize. Certainly, a big education for me was learning that how much intervention is needed to keep fish, to keep deer, to keep elk out there in herds thriving in Colorado. It's not just Colorado. We work with Wyoming, New Mexico, Utah, to get healthy livestock, or I should say wildlife, inside the state of Colorado, and that's in the water and on the land.
Definitely.
And the air, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Out of all the shows you've read, is there a particular article or edition of a magazine that you've read that really stood out to you in any way?
Yeah, just this recent one I read was maybe a couple of weeks ago, but it was having to do with exclusivity or inclusivity in the outdoors, meaning why are not all of the citizens of Colorado feel like they can use this? Is it open to every type of person in Colorado? Would you feel comfortable as a young African American going into Rocky Mountain National Park to go hiking? Is it comfortable on the trails? I think that's one aspect that's kind of left out of this is kind of not just everybody getting out, which the pandemic has brought on a huge influx of people using our outdoors and all of our parks, but the kind of people out there. We really wanted, I think certainly the Colorado Division of Wildlife appears to really be making great strides in that area of inclusivity and diversity.
Definitely. Well, I'm going to go ahead and switch focus over now to the audio and technical side of things, because we all love talking about that, myself included. So for long time, for listeners of the original Volunteer Spotlight, you might remember, we've had a huge kind of a very diverse range of volunteers. I mean, we have volunteers like Emily that reads the Human Health Program. She just records on a laundry basket in her clothing closet because it's nice and dampened and it sounds pretty good. I'd like to know what exactly, what is your recording space like, and get as technical as you want. What hardware do you use to record?
Sure. Well, like I say, I initially had been doing digital audio recording for music, and so I already had a Scarlett Focusrite 2, nice. Just a single XLR at a quarter inch input.
Yeah.
And it also has some preamps in there. So I was using that with a Shure SM58, which is, just a workhorse of a stage microphone.
Yes.
And I got a quick cloud lifter, pre-lifter for that, and I was off to the races.
Yeah. I mean, like I said in the beginning, I mean, the audio quality sounds like something you hear out of like a recording studio for something like Listening Library and like an audiobook. I mean, it is.
So the recording component for me is really just half the equation.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the second part is the editing and mastering of it all. I think that really makes a big difference for cleaning up any excess noise, and certainly the editing portion is going to clean up my terrible reading skills. So I believe that it's certainly, and I've gone above now to kind of quiet and dampen my room with moving blankets and the like, and some noise reflective panels that I've had that I've already kind of were using again for the music thing, because over the pandemic I'd moved drums in there and I've moved guitars, and so it's just one of those things, and you've got to control the sound or you're going to have bleed through and problems everywhere.
Yes, absolutely.
But really it's the editing and mastering that can do a whole lot for you. And I know that one of the things that technology is going to be bringing to us, and we've already seen it with this Adobe AI podcast component, which is it can take pretty poor audio and do a really good job of cleaning it up. I normally record into Adobe Audition, but I've just recently started to use Logic.
Nice.
Just this week, I say, it is my very first time using Logic. And I'm so comfortable with using Audition. It's still a learning curve for me with Logic, but I'm really enjoying it. And I certainly, I'm only using just 1% of its overall power for sure.
As a fellow Logic user, I totally appreciate hearing that. And you're a Mac guy too, obviously.
I use both, but yeah, my main computer at home is a Mac. I record into a Mac.
They're honestly, for any volunteers out there looking to get into a computer, if you want to get into the audio production, Mac is, in my opinion, the way to go. Unless you want to mess with things like Reaper and stuff. I have a hard time recommending that because, I mean, there's a lot more setup involved. Logic and even GarageBand is a lot more plug and play. And just it's so much easier. Just set up your Mac, plug in your mic, and then you're ready to go. You just got to level everything. And that is a good point, is there is a lot more to audio production than just making the recording. You got to do noise reduction if you have a lot of, if you're using a particularly hissy sounding mic, or, if you're like we are at AINC, fortunately this studio is it's far away enough from our server fans and stuff, but I have recorded in the past and, we've had to filter that stuff out because nobody wants to hear humming servers and stuff in the background of their show at all. You mentioned musical instruments.
Sorry, yeah, that was the next natural progression for me. Logic was because when I was doing the digital music recording, it was using GarageBand. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really natural progression right into Logic because it's a very similar interface, very similar in the way it uses the tracks and the way you control the tracks and master the tracks. So I thought that was a very natural progression for people who use GarageBand.
Yeah, I mean, Logic is basically just GarageBand upgraded. I mean, you have it. It's a lot more of a technical interface. It's a lot like because GarageBand's more like, you just throw some instruments together and line up your tracks and like set the tempo and the key, and then you got a song. You can, they have like things like export immediately to SoundCloud and stuff. Logic is more pro level, and it's not a cheap program. It's $300. I think I paid $300 when I bought it.
It's $200 now, I think. But it also has a 90-day free trial out there.
They do, yeah, and it's easy. You can't get it from the Mac App Store. You have to search on Safari or whatever for Logic Pro trial. But it is once you download it, yeah, you'll get everything for 90 days. And another thing with Logic and even GarageBand to consider is you need a lot of disk space on your computer because you got to at least have a few gigs for just the basic stuff that it comes with, the instruments and the effects and all of the plugins that it comes with stock. And then, of course, you can get whatever you want for it on the web, and there's a lot of plugins out there.
So many, yeah.
And some of them can cost like $500 or something like.
There's free ones, but it's a pretty large community. I found anything's a quick Google search away for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've definitely talked quite a bit about audio gear. You could get me talking for hours on audio gear. So.
Same.
Yeah, I'd like to know now, do you have any questions you'd like to ask me or just about AINC?
Well, ask you personally. Okay. There's one question I have as I'm reading things, given the nature of what I'm talking about, really tends around talking about descriptions of people watching birds. Mm-hmm. When I'm someone that's sighted reading that, and you're someone maybe not sighted reading that, should I be changing that? Is that something I should be changing? Because it's really very biased towards a sighted person. And I almost feel somewhat guilty saying it the way is, if you use, for example, when you see this type of thing, it's a description, so it's less description of the actual event, which might be helpful and more descriptive of what you might have referenced as another sighted person.
Well, see, that's kind of a complicated thing. So if you're trying to describe a lot of like images and a lot of visual content, I definitely say describing it is key. Like, if there's an image of like a landscape, describing it and just the small details, like don't dive super deep into the image. But what I'd say as far as really to answer your question is, if it's stuff that does correlate to sighted, people or whatever, I would not change it. I mean, if it's the way it's written for any volunteer is, just the way it's supposed to be read, basically.
I'm with you on that. That's what makes me nervous about changing anything.
Yeah, so don't change it. And for any volunteer, if you're reading a newspaper or whatever, don't add any commentary or anything, personal into that show because, it's just what we're basically just trying to get is the content of the newspaper itself and transcribe that into an audio publication.
A real representation of what it says.
Exactly.
Well, that would also go towards article selection for me, too, and making sense in that way. I wish I had a more substantial question than that. Sorry.
That's okay. No, that definitely is perfectly fine. If you have any
what
other...
do you think about the ART preamp?
The ART preamp, I've never played with one. I actually want to play with one. But how does it sound? Is it...
I haven't. It's a purchase I'm considering making soon, so...
Yeah. I have noticed, at least in the sampling rate, a jump in your sampling rate from when you first started recording to now. Like you have...
So in the last couple months, I've been using borrowed microphones, been using a Rode NT1.
Wow.
So that one I really like. That one sounds really good. And then the other one is, of course, the other workhorse in the dynamic microphone range, the Shure SM7B. Mm-hmm. And that's the one I've been using recently. It's really nice just for form factor. I really like the 7B. No pop filter really needed for that. It's I don't need to be, because of an isolation stand, I don't need it to be facing a specific direction. I can be more flexible in how I set it up.
Yeah, and it looks less intrusive.
Yeah.
Because like these in the studios, for the real technical people, we're using Audio-Technica AT2020s. And they're decent mics, but they are very hot. And they are very sensitive to any wind noise. So we have to have a pop filter in front of each mic, because if you don't, and this is one of the very, very rare examples where I show this because I personally despise this sound. You get this popping noise, and you can hear that bassy thump in the recording. Any volunteers listening, please don't send in recordings with popping. Just throwing that out there. But yeah, these are they're XLR mics, and most professional mics, in fact, every professional mic I've seen uses what's called an XLR output, which is basically just the 3 pins that they plug into this kind of large cable, and then you plug that cable into your interface or sometimes a soundboard, just depending on what you do. A lot of more podcast / like YouTuber like centric or creator centric mics nowadays are USB. And the one advantage of that is that the audio from those mics is usually, it's a lot easier to get set up and a lot easier to just kind of
directly
balance the sound.
Yeah, and actually AT also has a AT2020 comes in a USB model.
Yep, and a couple of volunteers actually use that.
It's a good one.
It is a good one.
So I'm still experimenting with microphones.
Yeah.
If I had an unlimited budget, I'd probably go with the Neumann TL103, maybe. I don't know.
Wow.
So I've just been doing a lot of research on microphones, but yeah, those can get up into the pricey range, $600 to over $1,000. It depends on which one you're getting.
Yep. Although a lot of professional, like a lot of artists and stuff, do use Shure mics. They're actually really popular among.
That 7B is really popular.
Mm-hmm. Popular with radio hosts even. Like, it's a very full range mic. There's a lot less EQ that you have to do, like post-production.
One other one was the Electro Voice RE20.
I've heard of that, but I've never seen one.
It's mostly for radio production. I see it mostly in that way, but it's got good, like the SM7B, has good off-axis cancellation.
Yeah. The nice thing about Volunteer Spotlight being such an open show is, I mean, it might just be 1 month somebody just talking about, the show they produce, and then, occasionally it's just going to be two audio guys geeking out over audio gear in a studio for, half an hour. But
it's inevitable with any conversation with me, probably.
Yeah, and me too. So any future potential VOMs that hear that, just, be prepared. But thank you for letting me have you on the show. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and I hope I'm sure a lot of volunteers will actually be kind of interested to hear about all the audio gear, especially less technical people out there.
I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody ever needs to get a hold of me on that.
Sounds good.
Through AINC.
Of course. Well, thank you so much, Jon.
Thank you for the opportunity, and really appreciate all the nice recognition from AINC. That was nice.
Yep. And just as a reminder to our listeners, please be sure to check out all of our other original shows, including the newly launched Blind Level Tech. I should have put this in the beginning. That is a show that our podcast producer, Jonathan, and I am producing. And it's a show basically where we get to talk about, newly blind, what tech do you need? How do you get set up with your first smartphone? What is a screen reader even, and how do you get it set up? And we're going to have some fun tech demos. So yeah, check that out. It's available on all major streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Of course, always check out Blindsight with Bill Lundgren and Aftersight with Penn Street. They're great. They are very great shows, and they're getting better and better every day. Topic of the Month with Kim Wardlow, our executive director, is getting a new name change. So I'm not entirely sure what it's going to be called in the next few weeks. But for now, it's Topic of the Month. Definitely check it out, especially, even if you're sighted, if you're curious, what it's like to be blind. I mean, that show has real blind people that have, had experiences and that can talk about them. So check it out. And to all listeners, thank you so much for listening to episode number 3. It blows my mind that we're already on number 3 of AINC's Volunteer Spotlight. I'm your host, Evan Starnes, and we'll catch you in the next episode.